Hello, hello, and welcome to Breaking the Hex, a show about the inner work of collective liberation. I'm your host, Kim Rogers. I am super excited for today's episode because I'm joined by my homie, Leslie Mack. Leslie is a movement strategist and a comms maven who's been in the game for over 15 years, bringing a Black feminist lens to shape the vision, strengthen the voice, and deepen the impact of social justice organizations and movements at the local, state, and national levels. Leslie and I got to meet a few years back when we were part of the first cohort of Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Culture of Health Leadership Institute for Racial Healing. And I've just learned so much from her as we've deepened our relationship. I really feel like you can learn a lot about people by how they move in their personal lives. And earlier this year, maybe it was the end of last year, I had a chance to spend some time with Leslie and her husband. They hosted me for a weekend, and they are truly the hosts with the most. So kind, so thoughtful, and so welcoming. And Leslie is someone who really brings that vibe into her work, but she's also not to be played with. And so she brings a really great balance. And so I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you so much. And shout out to everyone at Netroots. We're so excited to be here in Philadelphia for Netroots. I think this is my 12th Netroots. And Kim is your first one. So it's exciting to be here together and experience it. And I'm happy to get into this conversation.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, let's jump in. So, at this point in your career, you are not new to this. You are true to this. But none of us are really born knowing how to organize and be activists, right? None of us are born with that kind of social consciousness. That awakening really comes through experiences that unfold throughout our lives. And in fact, you didn't come into organizing until you had already, had a couple of other careers. And so I'm really curious to know, who or what politicized you and how you came to be so committed in both word and deed to collective liberation.
Yeah, I have probably 3 stories to share. The first is short. It's really about my grandmother, who I got to spend a lot of time with. I am a first gen American of Jamaican heritage, and I got to spend a lot of time with my grandmother in the summers growing up. She was really committed to community service. And I remember on Sundays after church, we'd spend a good 2 to 3 hours just going to folks that were either sick and shut in or couldn't make it to church or just needed support. And yes, she was showing up with like actual spiritual guidance, but it always also included, they needed a bag of rice. They were looking for this school dress for their granddaughter. And spending all those Sundays sitting in folks' living rooms while my grandmother really tended to them was informational in terms of how to build community, how to be in community, and what our responsibility is to community. My grandmother used to have this saying, which is, Leslie, everyone's always welcome in from the cold, but people have to earn a seat at your table. And so I've carried that with me throughout my life, even before my organizing, which is just this notion that I have a responsibility to others. And while I do have to have boundaries in place, we do have a responsibility to cover as many people as we can, to support as many people as we can.
Yes.
The second was that I left the United States for a couple of years, and it really shifted my worldview significantly. I moved to Argentina with my husband for work, and we had such a deep community connection. And when we moved back here, it was like a culture shock of, the United States typical, backyard setup where it's like you go in your home and then you don't talk to anybody else. And so through that awakening, we became Unitarian Universalists, which is a very small religious faith, but one focused on justice and focused on equality. And through that sort of was the first awakening of my organizing work, which was working with my church congregation and congregations around the country. I started out doing a lot of bail support, jail support, reform around policing. And that was kind of my first entry into doing organizing work. And then the third thing I'll mention, and this is a shout out to Ryan Coogler, though I know he won't hear this, is that I saw Fruitvale Station in the theater. And I sat after that movie and I was just sitting about 30 minutes just in tears.
It's brutal.
I haven't watched it since. But it really did change my life, because what it really did was awaken a radicalness in me and an understanding that reforming these corrupt systems was never going to actually help us. get to the liberation we deserve. And so that was kind of my third awakening. It really shifted my work into a much more radical anti-capitalist abolitionist framework from there. And so I just started just like studying about all of those things, about like, whoa, I've been kind of tinkering on the edges, trying to change policy at a level of like, banning the box so people didn't have to disclose that they were felons in advance, and reentry work, which I think is still really important. But I also recognize that there needed to be a more deeper reckoning around liberation in the United States and in the world, quite frankly. And that movie was kind of the key to unlocking that part for me.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. I think what's resonating with me about what you're saying is there's a sort of journey into coming into your political self.
Mhm.
I think I started the same way. Liberal, like wanting the progressive things, and then the more stories you see, the more headlines, the more experience, the more times you witness a Black person be killed by the state, the more you're like, wait a goddamn minute, like this, we cannot. Trying to change this system, it doesn't want to change.
Mhm.
It's durable as hell. Now that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing the things we can in our sphere of influence, but I think there also is this broader consciousness, which I think we're seeing now with the ways that people are having progressive folks are moving towards radicality and a more global mindset of America as empire and what it means to live in an empire, and how we think beyond our borders about freedom and liberation. So I appreciate you bringing that up. You talked about when you entered and some of the work you started with. And so I'm curious, nobody also comes in knowing everything and able to like execute flawlessly. And so throughout your journey, what has the inner work of collective liberation looked like for you, right? What are some of the things you've had to unlearn, and where have you stumbled, and how did you move forward?
So much stumbling. I talk all the time about like the how we do liberation work is just as important as the what, because how we build the world we want to see is how we relate to each other. So it's not enough to get a good outcome if that outcome came through harm, came through putting people in positions they didn't want to be in. So for me, that duality was very present, and I had to kind of unlearn that, like coming from a background where the outcome, the data, what do we get out of it? And flipping it, it's like, what was the time we spent together and what was the value of that? And yes, we do have an outcome and we want to move things, but that how piece really was something that shifted for me, which is like, that's when I get to live out the world I want to see, is when I'm in relationship with you, when we're in spaces where we're dreaming together. And so the sacredness of that really sat with me. And then the other thing I'd mention is I think it was around 2011, I was asked to do a sermon at my church, and I titled it The Unintentional Other. And it really was about kind of myself confronting what it means to really believe in the dignity and humanity of all people. And some of that was some personal confrontation, like, how was I judging people for how they looked, where they lived, what education they had, how they talked, all of these things that are ingrained in us as Americans, in particular USians, to judge other people and make assumptions about them. And so the sermon was really focused on my own internal awakening around that, around not judging people. And it freed me in so many ways. Like, honestly, if you see how I dressed then to how I dress now, and that sounds frivolous, but like, I wasn't living into my full self. Sure. I was my full colorful self, doing the things I wanted to do, being the way I wanted to be in the world. And so in coming to understand that judgment is part of white supremacy culture, yes, I was able to stop judging myself too. So it was a personal awakening that then spilled over into the work that I wanted to do. Yeah.
I love that. I have a good friend, Dr. Tia Cherie Gaynor, who talks a lot about how healing our relationship with ourselves and healing our own humanity allows us to show up more human in the world. And I think what you're talking about is a direct reflection of that. I also really like this how versus what thing, because I think people are more focused on the what than the how. And I think it's because the how requires us to confront our self-concept. And that is the most difficult thing to do, is to look ourselves in the mirror and really grapple with and reconcile with the ways that if you are born in America or have spent any extended period of time being socialized here, the culture of inequity is ingrained in you, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, whether you recognize it or not. And so a part of our work in that how is doing that dismantling internally so that we can show up with other people in ways that are more reflective of who we say we want to be.
For sure. It's like an extension of that whole, the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. And this, to me, this how versus what is like a deeper analysis of that concept. Because it's not just the tools themselves, but also how we use them. Because like a hammer is a hammer, and we can use a hammer in a lot of different ways. It's not enough to say the hammer is bad. It's much more effective to be like, how are we using this hammer? Who's it hurting? Who's it helping? And how are we making decisions around the use of this hammer with that in mind?
Yes. And so, a big reason I created Breaking the Hex is because there is this growing public realization that the people, the systems, institutions with the most power and resources aren't all that interested in meaningfully or sustainably addressing the root causes of inequity.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge becomes, while a lot of people are now speaking the language of social justice and sort of publicly disavowing oppression and harm, far fewer are embodying and acting in alignment with the values that they claim. Folks are more concerned with the appearance of an enlightenment and allyship than they are with doing the difficult work of unlearning to dismantle the stories and systems that uphold this culture of inequity. And you clocked this a decade ago when you created the Safety Pin Box with Marissa Janae Johnson. Y'all, for those who don't know, what these ladies did is they created this subscription service that really challenged people to move beyond symbolic allyship and actively engage in learning and practicing anti-racism in their lives. And so I'm really curious what that project taught you about people's capacity to, I think, first enter the work. I think entering the work feels easy because it's the right thing to do. What did it also teach you about their ability to sustain the inner work of collective liberation?
Wow. Oh, goodness. So the first thing I would say is that just as far as the project that was Safety Pin Box, Marissa and I really dreamed this up right after 45's first term when he first won. And we were actually on vacation together with a bunch of girlfriends. And I was like, man, these people should just pay us and let us tell them what to do. That was kind of the kernel of the idea. And then when we started talking more about it, it was like, yeah, but also, like, as Black women, we can't really tie our success to what white people do or don't do. It just is, it's an okie doke. Like, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And so we crafted the company around two things. One, yes, providing very top-notch, actionable content for our subscribers to make a difference in their communities. But secondarily, and much more importantly, was moving money from white people directly into the hands of Black women, gender expansive folks. And so the time that we were up, we were able to move $250,000 directly into the pocket of Black women and gender expansive folks. And when I say we had a fund called Black Women Being, it was $1,000 gifts for each time. You just filled the form out. I just needed your name and how you want it paid. I didn't care if you used it to get your nails done or you needed it to pay your light bill. It didn't matter to me, sis, because I know one thing about us is when money comes into the hands of Black women, it goes into our communities tenfold. So for us, it was about kind of that, flipping that on its ear and providing some support. Now, as far as the lessons that came out of the actual work with our subscribers, and we talked about this earlier, was, it really moved me from a place of, when people know better, they do better. Because here we are providing the know better, giving them the opportunity to do better. And what I learned is, one, some people, they're ready for the work and they really dug in. And there's a lot of really amazing projects around the country that came out of the work of Safety Pin Box and the subscribers and what they did. And also there were people that were just there to give their money, and people who live under, I've switched my kind of worldview around this, which is if they wanted to, they would. So that it was a big switch for me in that experience of, we could tell the people who wanted to and did, and then the people that were just like, they wanted to support us, they wanted to support the effort, but the work itself wasn't that important to them. And so I think that's really one of the things I need all of us to confront. And this is not just a white thing. I think it's about all of our communities kind of thinking about, are you there for impact? Are you there for performance? Are you there for visibility? And this isn't me making judgments about the value of each of those things. But I think when you're not clear about why you're showing up, things get muddled. And people that are there for visibility, which has value, will get pigeonholed as people that are there for impact. And then we have a disconnect. And it doesn't resonate with the audience. It doesn't resonate with the folks you're trying to build with. And it certainly doesn't resonate with the folks that you're trying to support. So those are some of the lessons that I took out of that experience. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that because I think it feeds into what I was talking about even that is part of confronting the self-concept, your ability to say why, be honest about why you're here. And I think that's hard. I've been seeing a lot of, especially Black women, I wish I could think of their handles, but on Instagram talking about goodness and the ways that goodness, I think unintentionally gets weaponized or people use it. It feels like a shield in some ways. People feel like but I can't be doing harm. I'm a good person. The intention becomes more, they're more tied to the intention than the impact. And I think that creates some, people don't end up not showing up to spaces, but showing up inauthentically because they can't be honest about their sort of whole being
exactly
and why they're there.
Yeah, because if you're showing up for visibility, then your actions should speak to that, and it should be as visible as possible, even if it puts you in harm's way, right? If you're showing up for performance, then what is the performance meant to give to people? So again, I'm not putting a hierarchy in those things, but I am naming that you can't show up for one and then act as though you're doing the other. And then the other thing that I would mention, because you were just talking about, wait, remind me what you just said.
Oh, girl, I'm the worst at this. These little brain cells are holding on for dear life.
I know, we're holding on.
Goodness.
Yes, goodness.
Okay.
So the thing I want to mention about that is I like to always make a distinction between good and kind. So good is performance. It's how you want people to see you. And kindness is how you make people feel. And so I want people to really think about that duality. When you are upset, if you're in your feelings, are you in your feelings because you're not being seen as good? Or are you in your feelings because you weren't able to care for someone? Those are two very different places to come from. And how you tend to yourself tends to be different. Because if you're upset about how you look, that's something you need to do for yourself.
Right.
If you're concerned about how the impact or what care you provided, that's something you need to be in community to address. And so I think keeping those separate, and I always say, I want to be kind, not good. I don't care about good. Y'all could keep good.
Yeah. I'm learning that for myself too. And kind of similarly with this sort of on the ground work, and you were there in Minneapolis to support frontline folks who were protecting their communities during Operation Metro Surge. And lots of people showed up from all different backgrounds. And you were particularly embedded with faith leaders who were standing up and saying, look, not on our watch. And so I'm very curious, in terms of who was present and how they showed up, getting back to that, what differences did you see from this particular moment in comparison to the Ferguson uprising in 2014 or even the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests?
Ooh, well, I'll mention a few things I think are different about each of these eras. So 2014, Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, not Sandra Bland, Eric Garner. We're talking about a moment where Black communities were activated and understanding that police violence and extrajudicial killings of Black people were not being met with the attention that they needed to, not just by media, not just by the state, not just by these systems, but by ourselves, by our own communities. And so that awakening was really about building a connection with each other and talking about the way that white supremacy culture has affected each of us and what does it look like to build organizations, build systems, build community connection with each other. And obviously there was a larger ask of these systems to try and change them. And I'd like to call that the reform era, though many of us were shouting for abolition. But I think that was a time where we thought, especially considering who was president and the way that policy was moving, that there was a way for us to, through the courts, through legislation, to make ourselves safer. So I'll leave that there and just name that. I would say for faith and clergy, it was a difficult time. They didn't know their space. They didn't quite understand what role they were there to play. Is it amplification? Should I shut up? Is it not supposed to be about me? It's really about young people. And I think they had a hard time kind of finding their way in. I advise a lot of folks, just hold space for them. Open your church so they can have meetings there for free. Those were the things I was talking about then with clergy and faith organizers. When we moved to 2020, post George Floyd, we see a very different movement because we have a huge influx of people that are wanting to get involved because of the very violent and very graphic and very visible nature of the murder of George Floyd. And so at that moment, it was everybody wants to be in the streets. We're coming off COVID. Everybody wanted to be outside. And so I think that it was a galvanizing moment to show that people cared. And I think that's important that they show their care. I think our movements have been bad about absorption. And I think that we're in a moment now where that's being catered to a lot more. And we're starting to see people joining movements, joining organizations, joining formations, and being much more effective in their community work.
Say real quick, say what you mean when you say absorption. Like
So-
they're being co-opted or
No, I would say more. So you go to a rally, you go to a protest, you go to a march, and then what happens to you? Like, how are you plugging back into the work?
Yeah.
And how are organizations and formations making that easy for you? Are they tabling? Are they handing out QR codes? Are they getting, information from you? Like, you said I've been in this for a while. Like, I used to bring a clipboard to every action, and I was, taking people's numbers and their email addresses so I could contact them and have them come to the next thing we were doing. And so a lot of that, we lost some of that in the digital age. We stepped away from some of those, hard skill tools. And it's fitting we're here in Philly because most of my first community organizing work was here in Philadelphia. Okay. And came out of, I held a national moment of silence. Shout out to Feminista Jones for starting that huge moment of silence around the country after Mike Brown was murdered. And a whole org was built out of that one action. We came together, it was like 500 of us, really, we should meet some more. So the Quakers gave us space and we started meeting once a month, and we built out infrastructure and we built out what we wanted to do. And it became a conglomerate and a coalition of orgs around the city that had a space, a table to sit at together and work through conflict. And there was conflict and we were able to do that. So that's what I mean by absorption, is like giving people on ramps to really go from the performative moment of showing up and being visible to, okay, now I want to get deeper into the work and actually do something and make an impact. And how do I bring myself into this work more authentically? Yes. I want to also just talk about the uniqueness of Minneapolis and the Twin Cities, generally speaking, because I think it's really important to put this in the right context. I've been working with folks in Minneapolis for almost as long as I've been doing this work. And so I've been there for many, many, many inflection points where that community has risen up. And so I like to always talk about Jamar Clark's murder and the takeover of the police precinct there by BLM Minneapolis and others. And they held that space, for weeks. For weeks, they held that space. And it was really, being there with them, seeing what they were doing. They had a meal kitchen set up. They were doing political education. They were doing healing circles. They were just having conversations with each other. And they really just turned it into a community space. And we saw the same thing when Philando Castile was murdered in Minneapolis. This is another group of people that came back together and were building community with each other. And so this moment, when we're talking about DHS, we're talking about ICE, we're talking about the state violence against our neighbors. Minneapolis, they have a very unique positionality around the fact that everyone's my neighbor. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care what your stuff is. If you are in my community and we are neighbors, then I care about you and I want good for you. Mm-hmm. And so what happened in Minneapolis after Renee Good was killed, we saw clergy, and this is something I want to really talk about, see a new call for themselves to show up, not just in solidarity, but to put their bodies on the line, to say, not just out of my watch, but like, this is holy work. This is work I'm called to that speaks to my own religious and faith formation, that I feel that I can't not just be silent, but I actually have to be there. And so I was able to work with an amazing organization called March Minnesota, and we put out, much like Dr. King did to Selma, we put out a call to clergy and said, hey, we need you. We need you on the ground. We're doing a huge day of action on a Friday. We want everybody in town Wednesday night because Thursday, we're going to train you. And we spent all day Thursday training folks. At the beginning of the day, they decided which of 4 actions they were going to take on Friday. And so we just broke everyone up. In the morning, they heard stories from people in Minneapolis that were directly affected by this surge and by ICE generally speaking. And then in the afternoon, they went to their trainings and they learned what they were going to be doing. So some folks took arrests at the airport in a very visible action. Some folks did cop watch. Some folks did ice watch. Some folks went to the murder site of Renee and held space for people and did a singing ministry. So it was really about us skilling them up and also knowing this fight was going to not just be local to Minneapolis. So we were trying to also equip them with not just knowledge, but skills that they could take back to their communities and figure out what will work for them when ICE is in their, is not when, but is in their communities and what to do. So it was a really powerful weekend of action and connection and really, pushing clergy to show up the way that locals needed them to. Yeah.
Ooh, that's a lot.
Yeah.
You be working. And there's a lot. There's like so many. I have like my little notes are full of so many threads. I think one of the first thing that comes to my mind is, and for some reason, like when I think about faith leaders, I think about their capacity to witness. And I think witnessing, going back to when you first started talking, you were saying how even in our communities and Black communities, up until that point, let's say to George Floyd's murder, there was, or maybe even going back to Michael Brown, there's almost this sense of, well, this is just how America works. So when you see a Black person get killed, well, God damn it happened again. And I think there's a way that just, again, the durability of white supremacy and of structural racism and of the hex has made it so that it has diminished our capacity to witness and our capacity to relate. And so there's this disconnection as people try to show up for this work and like even feeling like it's their fight at a certain point. And so I really appreciate you sort of talking about how faith leaders realized they might have shown up in previous ways before, but this whole holy work, like everybody has a piece of this. And the sooner that we can help people find that piece, because again, you don't just come to it. You're not just going to show up and be like, I am ready for this thing. And I love that you brought up that you all spent a day training them, because I think that's another thing. I really feel like there's a way that, or this sense among people that you are going to show up fully evolved to organizing, to activism, to social justice work. And that's just not the truth. And so it feels very important to me in the work I'm doing to help people hold the limbo of becoming this person that you say you want to be. Live in that limbo instead of showing up feeling ready to feel shame or guilt. Show up ready to be like, oh shit, I don't know this. Let me learn it. Let me embrace the uncertainty and the not knowing in a way that I think allows you to, again, release the hesitancy of showing up at all. If you're not, quote, ready, whatever ready
means, right? Like none of us are ready. We just be out here baptized by the blood. Anyways, in these streets. No, I think two things. One is like there's the real reality. We're human beings and we're scared. And that is something I think people need to get in touch with and understand how that shows up in their body, like sooner than later, because it is scary. It's very scary out here. And so I don't want to downplay that. And at the same time, the gap is between being brave and being true to yourself. And so the question we have to each ask ourselves is, what do we need to do to fill that gap, to close that gap from one another? And oftentimes I literally say, just ask what you can do. Like, it's not that complicated. Find people doing good work, ask what they need, see what you can meet in their needs. And that's the first shift that happens. And then once you get into doing it, you start to change. The work changes you. And I also say that, Mary Hooks talks about this, about, being willing to be changed in the service of the work. That is what we're all called to do. And I also would just note that people want to make a difference. I do believe that. I know I jokingly say I don't like people, but people do want to make a difference. I think they don't know what that means oftentimes. And so breaking down barriers, breaking down walls, being in community with each other, having conversations. And this can go macro, it can go very micro. I say all the time, like, what are you talking about at dinner? You can be that person in your family that's like, okay, I'm not going to be too much, but at each meal we have together, I'm going to talk about 2 political topics.
Yeah.
And just talk about what I've been hearing, see what they're hearing, correct some misinformation, maybe a little bit. We've gotten away from this notion that we are accountable to ensuring that we know things, and that we're accountable to each other to ensure that we're passing on knowledge. And I think that's really crucial in that, enlightenment and embodiment piece of just like knowledge being important. How do we impart that knowledge? And the last thing I'll mention is that, it's always there's always learning, because white supremacy is insidious. And the minute that we create a system or a response to one piece of it, it has already morphed into something else. And so we see enslavement, post Reconstruction morph into Jim Crow. We see Jim Crow morph into mass incarceration. We're now watching mass incarceration morph into this hyper nationalistic, fascist state that we are dealing with now. So part of this is that even as organizers, we find ourselves playing catch up, because the systems have the power in specific ways. We have all power to the people.
Amen.
But it morphs. And so we always have to be fluid. It's never a moment where I'm like, I learned the thing and now I'm done. It's like, nah, that thing you learned, it already has 2 more iterations, and we got to stay on top of all of them. So it's a lifelong process, a lifelong journey of constant. I learn stuff every day and I'm like, ooh, that's cool. I didn't know about that. Or dang, I didn't know that's how that worked. Let me figure it out, because I was thinking of it totally differently. So as long as I've been in this and all the places I have been on the ground, it's never ending.
Right.
It's never ending.
The not knowing for me, I feel like is such a barrier for people, because in our society, maybe even more globally, it's like not knowing is the worst thing you could do. People are so afraid to be like, oh wait, I didn't know that, or to ask a question. And so I'm glad to hear someone like you communicate that this is perpetual, lifelong work. We are never finished. We are never complete human beings. Because I hope that somebody listens to this and says, well, shit, if Leslie Mack is like, I got to learn something today, then I'm good showing up and knowing that it's okay for me to not know. And I think another thing that gets overlooked is that you come into your knowing through experimenting, through trying. I used to be have such terrible perfectionist tendencies that I wouldn't even try things and end up just qualifying myself, because again, back to this point of readiness. And it's been transformative for me to really embrace not knowing as a pathway to more. I don't know. Okay, go figure it out. And then you really, it has allowed me to, it allows you to test your ideas. It allows you to be in dialogue with people.
Yep.
There's just so much possibility that comes from accepting and living with the unfinishedness of what this life is.
Absolutely. I want to shout out my comrades at Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. We have 7 principles, but one of them is that experimentation and innovation must be built into our work.
Hell yeah.
And so for us, that has meant a lot of things. We were like, let's do a revival, let's do a tour, let's challenge congregations to raise $30,000 for Black Mama's bailout. Like, we have spent a lot of time just being like, what could we do? What are the possibilities that people don't think that we should be doing? Let's buy some property in North Minneapolis and build homes, affordable homes for Black and Indigenous families, which we're in the midst of doing right now. So like, for me, it's always been about this idea of the experimentation, and that's what we're here to do. White supremacy culture tells us we should never experiment. And if we don't know the lines, and we don't know exactly how it's going to come out, then we shouldn't be doing it. So if we know that to be true, then we know the opposite of that, which is messy and chaotic, because we're humans, and that's mess and chaos. That's where we need to be situating ourselves. That's not to say we don't have discipline, because discipline is present, right? Yep. Discipline is present. But we have to be able to say, oh, throw a bunch of stuff at the wall. This worked, this didn't work. Why didn't that work? What could have been tweaked about it? What are the pieces of that one we want to take with us? What are the pieces we definitely want to leave behind? So all of that is part of the work, and it's the exciting part for me. It's like, oh, dang, that didn't hit the way you wanted it to. Why? How could we have done it better? What are the ways, what are the lessons we can take from it? And that cycle goes on and on and on. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Reclaim that imagination.
That's right.
Try some shit that they say.
Try
is not
some
possible.
new stuff.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah.
There's an exhibit here right now, just behind us, actually, that is about self-managed abortion care, and they set up an entire apartment. And it's set up as though if you were self-managing your abortion, what would you need in that space? They have a living room, they have a bathroom, they have a kitchen with snacks, they have a sacred space. I walked through it and it really just hit me in my chest of just like, this is such an innovative way to teach people about this thing that's become such a hot button issue. It's become so, you know, something people don't want to touch. And here they are presenting it to people in a way they can experience it. And so those are the things that really excite me to see. It's why I keep coming back to Netroots, because it's always something like that I'm like, wow, that was really neat. That really allowed me to see this experience and this issue in a new way. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, you know, yes, I'm curious, with all, you're doing a ton of work, and this is a very general, broad question. So come at it any direction. Mm-hmm. You know, where do we go from here in this particular moment? What's on your more immediate horizon for how we get free?
Woohoo. Okay, so first thing I want to say is that we cannot win without strong labor. So I want to really just make that very super clear, is support organized labor, support unions, join a union if you can, think about starting a union. People power and worker power is really the biggest lever that we have, and we need to start exercising it more and more. We need more people joining all of those fights. And I also want to say, listen, whatever industry you're in, if they've never had a union, you might be the first one. Mm. You might be the first. So don't think that just because, they've never had a union in this sector, that's okay. You can be the first one to do it in yours. So the more that we can bring people together in their workplaces and their communities to come together, the better. So I want to talk about labor there. I also want to talk a little bit about Ella Baker. She's my idol, my all-time, on my Mount Rushmore of civil rights icons. I put Ella very high at the top for a number of reasons, mostly because she didn't write a lot. There ain't no book out there for her to tell you what she did. She coined the term spade work. And she defined spade work as, when you're in your garden, you got to get your spade in there and you got to dig up the dirt. You got to unearth things. You got to pull out the stuff that doesn't work. You have to plant the things that do. You have to caretake. So she saw spade work as being in community with people very directly and power mapping at a very personal level. She talks all the time about, SNCC, they spent a lot of time in the South, especially doing voter rights work. And she said she would get to a town, a small rural Black town, and she'd get introduced to the minister, and who is one of the main leaders of the town. And at some point, someone would tug her shirt and say, hey, I know you talked to Pastor so-and-so, but Miss Josephine in the back, she's the one that actually does the work. So you really need to get in with her if you're trying to mobilize this community. So when I say Ella was in the midst of this, she knew, yes, there was some front-facing interaction I needed to, but I also needed to do that spade work and figure out who was really getting their hands in the dirt and how do I connect with them and make sure that the messages that we're trying to get apart and the community we're trying to reach, that we're going through the right channels, because they going to Miss Josephine when they got a problem. Right? They showing up for pastor on Sunday and they'll go there for their pastoral care. But when they need, when they need a dentist, when they need some extra eggs, it's Miss Josephine that's getting it for them. And so you want to be in connection with those folks. And then a second story about SNCC and Ella Baker. So there was a moment where there was kind of this like shift and sort of disagreement within SNCC about what they wanted to do moving forward. Some really wanted to focus on voting rights, and that's what they wanted to really drive home with. The other really wanted to talk about civil rights and Jim Crow and addressing the inequalities of Black people in this country at a social level. And so they were spending, when I tell you all day, they was all day arguing about this. And Ella was in the back of the room, not saying much. Towards the end of the day, she gets up and she says, hey, y'all, I've been sitting here listening to y'all. And I just want to ask, what if y'all did both? And then she sat back down. That's all she said, the one sentence.
Imagine being able to hold two things.
What if y'all did both? And then she sat back down and they spent the whole rest of the night talking about that one question. She had a few more interjections, but by the morning, SNCC had been rebuilt. And they had two wings, one that was going to be working on voting rights, one that was going to be really focused on civil rights. And it just goes to show you that being in the room, listening to young people do what they do, and then offering not a solution, but a question to the space to broaden what they might say. So shout out to Ella Baker. May she rest in power. But I just wanted to mention those two stories about like the unfinished work and how that keeps going. I also would like to say that people think that all of us in movement, like that we kiki all the time and we're all best friends, and I'm here to tell you we're not. We frequently disagree, and that is a good thing. It is really amazing to be in disciplined struggle with like-minded people. When I say like-minded, meaning we're values aligned, because we are going to have different perspectives, different places we started at, different places we're at right now, different backgrounds, different upbringings. All of that comes into play. And so when we're able to have conflict, principled, disciplined conflict with each other, that's how we work through the difficult things. It's how we come to amazing solutions and potential, you know, services and things that we can provide for our communities. And because this is ever evolving, those conflicts will always continue to come up, and it's part of the work. It's not a bad thing.
Right.
You know, it's a good thing for me to know, like, I love you, and we can be in disciplined conflict with each other because of that love, because of our shared commitment to liberation. All that other stuff we can leave behind and actually talk through what our differences are. But to answer your other question, which was about people listening that are like, oh no, I don't know what to do. So first is like, get involved in your community. Whatever you're interested in, somebody is working on it wherever you are. So take inventory of three things. The first is your time. How much time do you have to devote? And are you able to honestly make a commitment and be clear about what that time is? Number two, what is your talent? So what can you offer? What are the services you can do? Are you a web developer? Do you take photos? Are you good at copy editing? Do you have space that you can offer? This is what, can you cook? Literally, do you own a drink company? You can bring lemonade to the function. Whatever you got, think about what talent you have to offer. And then the last thing is treasure. And yes, I do mean money, but also not just money, but money in addition. So those three things: time, talent, treasure. Take inventory of yourself, what you can offer in those three ways to movement spaces. And then you have a series of questions to ask yourself once you've determined what you have to offer. The second is, what are you most anxious about right now? I tell people that wherever my anxiety sits, that's the work I want to be doing, for two reasons. One, you care a lot if you're feeling anxious about it. And two, and I'm going to look in the camera when I say this one, when you work on issues that you're anxious about, your anxiety goes down. I'm going to say it again. When you work on issues that you are anxious about, your anxiety goes down because you internally know you're actually doing something to affect change. So I want to say that. So that's what do you have to offer: time, talent, treasure. What are you most anxious about? Once you figure out those two things, figure out who's already doing that work where you are. You don't need to start an org. You don't need to start anything new. You don't need to. People are already doing this work. Look to Black women, look to Black trans women, look to gender expansive people, look to not just Black led, but Black founded orgs. Look to orgs that are rooted in Black community and looking to create material change for Black communities as well. And once you have those three things, like, you got a recipe, you know what you have to offer, you know the issue that makes you anxious, you know who's working on the issue, and now it's time to get to work. Yeah.
Well, there we go. Y'all got a recipe now. So what you gonna do with it? We got to go pick up those ingredients and get to work. Yes. Leslie, this has been really powerful. I mean, I love spending time with you for many reasons, but you're just so insightful and so incisive in the way that you approach this work. And I think you do a really excellent job of showing people the pathways in. I think it's easy to talk in high level, talk the language. And like you said, because if you're in movement spaces, you are often in an echo chamber. So what makes sense to you, you think everybody understands it. I think you really remind us that it's important to break things down. It's important to recognize that people are coming to the table with different experiences, different capacities, different resources. And it is our job as people who have been in this work longer to make space for those folks, and to give them an opportunity to contribute in the ways that really align with where they are in their journey, because that's the only way. We cannot continue, and I feel like this happens a lot in leftist spaces, and maybe more so in digital organizing, of drawing these really hard perfectionist lines around how you have to show up and how you have to be, when the truth is showing up is the first part, and we can figure out the rest later. I do think, I'm glad you brought up the pieces about repair and rupture, because that's such a big part of it. And I think collectively we all have a lot to learn about how to see conflict as generative and not as a door instead of a wall, as I like to say, and what it means to walk through that door together so that we can continue moving towards the future and this collective life and collective vision that we want. So
Yeah, and so many of the barriers you mentioned are really just manifestations of white supremacy culture. Directly, perfectionism is a symptom of white supremacy culture. You know, this idea that conflict is bad, that is also a symptom of white supremacy culture. So we find ourselves constantly, when you hit a roadblock, I guarantee you that there is a white supremacy culture symptom that is at play. And so getting familiar with that too, and knowing like, oh crap, oh, my ego showed up here, like, ooh, I need to switch that around. So I think all those things are super important, and that there's a place for you if you believe in collective liberation, if you believe in your own liberation, because it starts within. There's a place for you. There's a place for you.
amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Listen to Black women.
We do a tag on the show.
What for?
Just to be like, listening to the heads. Da, da, da.